Welcome to Ali Fitness Podcast, a weekly production all about bringing health into fitness. Now that I've moved to NYC, I thought it fitting to get the well-known or very well-known breathing expert, Dr. Belisa, on the show to help us breathe. Dr. Belisa is not only a clinical psychologist, public speaker and author, but she also finds time to be a regular guest on national television, including CNN, Fox News, The Today Show, just to name a few. After being interviewed by the likes of Anderson Cooper and Dr. Oz, I thought she was just qualified enough to come on Ali Fitness Podcast to teach us all about how to breathe. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on Ali Fitness Podcast. I'm very excited to be here, and welcome to New York.
Excellent.
More than anything. Welcome to the Big Apple.
Well, one of the reasons I came here was to talk to people like you and to help our listeners breathe. Funnily enough, it seems such a simple thing, and it seems almost a bit strange that we need to be taught how to breathe. Before we even go into breathing, I guess you didn't go to study clinical psychology to learn how to breathe, but how did that all come about?
I didn't. I studied clinical psych in order to have a therapy practice and work within a therapeutic setting. So it was a little bit of a change, but I'm finding that having the degree really helps me because breathing not only is something that affects us physically, but it affects us mentally as well. It's both conscious and unconscious. So I'm actually very grateful to have the psych degree. I think it helps a lot for being able to understand how people have changed their breathing and then how to motivate them to make it better. But my own story had to do with looking for different ways of reducing stress and then really loving the breathing that we did in yoga class, but then wanting to see what other sports were doing as well in order to come up with a method that was very science-based and very practical. And that's sort of how I came about the breathe method and my class called the breathing class.
Okay, so it all started in yoga with like pranayama style breathing or?
Yes, exactly. So, I just loved alternate nostril breathing. I love the breath retentions, Ujjayi and Kapalabhati. Whenever we did them in class, I wanted to do more of them. But I wanted to expand from yoga breathing because obviously, pranayama and yoga is incredibly important. But I was interested in other sports and other people or methods that had looked at it sort of from a scientific point of view, from a biomechanical point of view, to be exact. When I look at someone now, the questions I ask them have to do exactly with that, the mechanics of it. I ask them if they're breathing in a way that's biomechanically sound, if it's anatomically congruous. Is it a way that our body is built? Are they using the right muscles and breathing in a way that's efficient given the way our bodies are set up? And most of the time the answer is no.
Right. So where did your research take you to after the yoga experiment?
It actually took me to martial arts. So I was looking both at martial arts in the sense of when you strike, the effort that you make and the exhale and the noise that goes along with it, but also martial arts that talk about breath in a very detailed way. So Sistema is one of the martial arts. It's a Russian martial art, and breathing in Sistema is talked about a lot. And then in every martial art, obviously being able to have good endurance, not be gasping for air, being able to have a good inner game and flow that's obviously based in the breath is very important. So martial arts was really the next step.
Okay. And did you start to see how the breath actually helped with performance and long-term health?
Oh, absolutely. And both of them in a very interesting way that was didn't seem related in the beginning. So it helped with mental health because that seemingly elusive parasympathetic state is quite easy when you know how to breathe what I call horizontally with your diaphragm. And also if you're breathing in an efficient way for your performance, you're going to be able to move faster, move for a longer amount of time, lift more weight, recover better. So both very, very, very different things in that one is very emotional and the other is sort of very concrete and physical, but it affects both almost immediately.
In a nutshell then, how do we breathe and how should we breathe?
So the way we breathe is a stress breath. and it's completely anatomically incongruous. It makes absolutely no sense with the way our body's designed. If you look at someone breathe, say you ask someone to take a deep breath, or you see someone on television taking a deep breath, usually there's a lot of shoulder movement. So there's a puffing up of the front of the chest. Shoulders usually move as well up towards the ears, even just a little bit, but they do move. And that is what we think of as a good deep breath. And unfortunately, that's a breath that puts us in a sympathetic state. It raises heart rate, blood pressure, cortisol, it lowers the immune system, and it actually uses what are usually auxiliary muscles, neck and shoulder muscles, as primary breathing muscles, and underutilizes really the most powerful muscle we have in our body, I think, which is the diaphragm. So the way we should be breathing is much more like a toddler, not a baby, but a toddler. And usually children up till the age of 5 really breathe perfectly, or like any animal on the planet. And today I actually put up a post where there is an image of an alligator breathing. And I talk exactly about that, is that we as human beings take a perfect breath, which is one that's horizontal, where we inhale and expand and exhale and contract, and we make it something that makes absolutely no sense and ripples throughout our body and hurts us really in the long run. Well, anyway, this alligator that I put up on Instagram breathes exactly like we should and like all the other animals that breathe well do, which is inhaling, expanding in the middle, and then exhaling and contracting or narrowing in the middle. And that's exactly the way we should be breathing, but I rarely see people that breathe that way, although they should.
It's funny because when I started looking into breathing, I came across your work and I remember you explaining it like that. And I started working with my daughter and watching how she breathed. And whenever she gets a bit sort of upset or a bit angry, I say, okay, let's just take 2 deep breaths. And it's amazing to start with what that actually does, but also to watch how she actually breathes compared to if I got an adult to do the same thing. It's like you said, that alligator sort of breathing right from the diaphragm.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And
great.
it goes away.
Mm.
It's something that you'll see a child, again, under, 5-ish, they breathe unabashedly, let their bellies go, take an inhale, and then exhale and narrow. Their shoulders don't move at all. They don't move their little shoulders ever. But once you start talking to an adolescent, say, a deep breath really is this incredible shoulder movement and posturing and stiffness in the torso, which if you do that for long enough, a decade or 2 as an adult, it ends up really exacerbating or causing a lot of medical and health problems.
So without people that have actually trained in breathing, what percentage of people, say over 5, would you estimate would have a breathing problem?
I used to say 9 out of 10. I think things are actually worse than that. I think it's 9.5 people out of 10 right now. I usually break down breathing into something that's not quite common, but it's much more practical and functional than other breathing assessments, is I look at what's called the breathing IQ, the BIC, and it looks at location of movement and range of movement. So it looks at the style of breathing a person has. And if you breathe vertically, the location of your breath is up by your shoulders, and the range of movement is vertical. It's not actually expanding at all. And that's actually someone who would get a bad grade on their breathing, and it's affecting their health. The breathing grade that gets A's and B's is one where the location of the breath is midway between your chest and your belly button. So that's actually where the best part of your lungs are, and that's where your diaphragm is. So the more the range of expansion and contraction, so the bigger the inhale and smaller the exhale, the better the breath. But very, very few people breathe in this horizontal way without having taken some kind of class or done some kind of research to try to get their body to remember the way they used to breathe when they were little.
It's fascinating. So obviously, I guess people can do a sort of a test that you mentioned, or they can just look in the mirror and watch their shoulders go up to their ears and realize that they need help. From there, what simple exercises can they do? And of course, there's lots of options with you working online, workshops, and we'll go into all of that. But what's a first step for someone that realizes that they do need help with the breath?
The easiest position, and honestly, I have to tell you that taking a workshop with me is not necessarily the answer. I mean, if you'd like to take one with me, that's great. But my mission is more about getting people to breathe better and empowering them with tools and with information. So I have no problem telling you the meat of what's in the book or in the workshops, because that's my mission, is to help people. So I'm not holding back on any secrets. And the book does have everything, and it's a book I really enjoyed writing and is very, very complete. It doesn't end with, and come take a workshop with me. But I also encourage people to take the book out of their local libraries as well. Come to the workshop if you'd like, but really I give out all the information in podcasts, in interviews. And like I said, the library is a wonderful place to be able to get the book and then bring it back again for someone else.
Awesome. And in the book, it suggests a 14-day protocol. Is that sort of a number that you think, if you dedicate time, 14 days, is that enough?
Yes. If you're determined, I've seen people do it in a much shorter time. If you're sort of wishy-washy about it, of course not. You're going to need way more time. But if you are saying, this is something that resonates with me, it's something I want to do, it's something I know is going to make me feel better, 14 days is enough. What's interesting is that it really is sort of self-reinforcing, because most people will start doing the breathing and then think, wow, I feel better. And they sort of don't know if it's the breathing or not, or if it's passing, or if it's magic or whatever's going on, but they actually will feel better very soon. And if they own that and really engage and commit to the process, they can really start feeling better from all kinds of things, from digestive problems, back pain, to sleep disorders. So I've seen it happen. It's not something I actually, started breathing to be able to heal, but my patients would come back to me and say, not only is my anxiety gone, but my acid reflux is gone. Not only is my nervousness and my depression alleviated, but I can sleep better at night and my back doesn't hurt. So it was kind of surprising for me as well. But back to your question, probably the easiest and the most basic movement that you can do is be on your back. So just come down onto your back on a yoga mat or a blanket, or, even on the floor, and put something on your belly. So when you put something on your belly, it's not that you need the weight, but it's because of two things. Number one is it brings awareness to that part of your body, which usually for most of us is pretty numb because we've been bracing or guarding or sucking it in. So we don't have a lot of awareness around our belly, and we don't have a lot of, good experiences around our belly. So putting something on your belly, and then in a very, very mechanical way, I want you to push that, let's say it's a book, push that book away on the inhale so that you pop your belly. And then on the exhale, let it drop. Now, again, you have to remember that I come from a place of biomechanics. So doing this doesn't have anything to do with chi or second chakra or universe, all things I love. This is really about trying to get your diaphragm engaged. So when you inhale and you relax your belly and you raise the books, you're just nudging your diaphragm that's probably a little bit locked up to wake up and start working. And you're not using your shoulders. It's very hard to breathe with your shoulders when you're lying down. So this is actually getting your body used to the whole concept that on the inhale, your middle should widen, your belly can rise, and on the exhale, your body should narrow, belly button closer to spine. Then from that movement, you have to take that concept of inhale, expand, exhale, narrow, and be able to do it when you're sitting and when you're standing, which is significantly harder. So I would say, please start lying down on the floor, some sort of weight on your belly. Inhale, let yourself expand. Exhale, let yourself narrow, and then try doing the same thing when you're sitting and when you're standing up. But be gentle with yourself because it is a big change.
And what sort of tempo would you use?
You know what? Tempo to me is secondary. I know that I have so many people come in and they say, I have such a hard time breathing in this tempo. And usually they're breathing vertically with a very small part of their lungs. So of course they can't slow down their breathing. What happens is that once you start breathing in a way that's what I call horizontal, using your diaphragm, your body naturally slows the breath down, and then you can pick a tempo that you want. The one that resonates the most with heart rate variability is 5 count in and 5 count out. Okay. So 1 count being a second. And that's the one that when you combine it with your heart rate being around 60 gives you the best heart rate variability. But again, the pattern of breathing is really secondary to the location of where you're breathing from.
I'm fascinated as to why we do breathe like we do. And you mentioned something just now about people wanting to suck their belly in. And do you think it's a product of society or it's something that we've evolved? Why do you think it is that we breathe like we do now?
Well, unfortunately, it is a change in our breath from the past, but it's hardly evolving because it actually isn't good for us. So although it's changed, it's really the opposite of evolving. It's not adaptive. It's not helping us at all. So we're doing something that's really maladaptive, that's taking a toll on our physical and our mental health, but it's becoming so widespread that we really have to look at it very closely and hopefully start a conversation that looks at why are we taking the biomechanics of our breath that used to be perfect? We're set up to breathe, expanding and contracting where the densest part of our lungs are. And now the concept of bracing your middle or guarding or sucking it in is so prevalent that we're breathing in a way that's completely anatomically incongruent. So it's important to have this discussion. I hope to be able to be part of the people that are starting it, but we've taken a breath that's worked, for a long time, and we've changed it so much that it's actually not working for us, and it's hurting our health tremendously because breathing is the cornerstone to your health. So everything else that you do is really icing. It's really secondary. Because if your breathing is not good, everything else may chip away a little bit or band-aid things, but it's not going to fix the problem. Really, our society that sits so much and that is so stressed out, the sitting and the stress and the technology has made our bodies not be able to work for us anymore when it comes to the breath.
Interesting. Okay. So we take that protocol that you mentioned, we lie down and then we slowly progress that into a sitting and then a standing. Where do we take it from there once we feel like we've mastered the standing breath?
Well, what happens is that you used to breathe this way. So you're really not learning anything new. I'm just reminding you of a breath that you used to take. The second thing is that your diaphragm wants to breathe this way. I mean, your diaphragm is a muscle that has to do with posture, but primarily it really has to do with breathing. You're really letting a muscle do what it's meant to do when you breathe this way. And both those things are self-reinforcing. So what happens is at some point within the 14 days or a little bit longer is that the breathing goes back to how it should be naturally. And it feels right. And intellectually, you understand that breathing with your shoulders isn't right. And that really helps to make the change. So you go back to breathing how you should, and you breathe that way most of the time, if not all of the time.
Just unconsciously?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And so do you think then a lot of our listeners are athletes or into sports in a big way? Do you think then that unconsciously when they do perform those sports that they would also breathe from their diaphragm?
I would hope so. But when people ask me, how should I breathe in my sport? I break it down into a way that's much more specific. When you are doing your sport and you're at a moment when, say, you're boxing and you're actually close up with the person that you're boxing with, or you're sprinting, or you're doing something that's very intense and almost unconscious, where the mechanics are something that you've practiced and you've done so that they become automatically. You certainly shouldn't be thinking about your breath in that moment. You should just be on automatic, going as hard and as fast as you can. However, if you've learned how to breathe or rebreathe with that lower body breath, it's going to affect many things in your performance. And the first thing is endurance, is that when you take a lower body breath, it takes up less energy than taking a breath with your shoulders. So when you're really performing and you're working hard, you're not taking 15 breaths. You might be taking 50 or 60 in a minute. And if you're using your shoulders to breathe, you're actually using up more energy than you're making. And that's going to be bad for your endurance, your conditioning, or your gas, really. So it's going to make a huge difference as far as how much energy you have. One breath, one horizontal lower body breath is worth 6 little ones with your shoulders, if you can imagine. So again, I use the analogy of being in the ring of if you go to your corner or if you're doing interval training and you have a few seconds to rest before you start something else, you better be able to take breaths that are efficient, that are really big, that don't take up a lot of oxygen, that clear your body of lactic acid and of lymph, and that really, really help you to recover before, the next thing you do. And then for recovery, we're talking more about recovery than we ever have before, about regen and recovery, but people don't really know what to do on the days that they recover. They just don't train. It's not that they actually rest. But if you learn how to breathe and you have a breathing practice on the days that you recover, you can actually do your breathing practice in order to oxygenate and heal your muscles and also lower your cortisol so that you can train again soon.
And what would a breathing practice look like? Is there an app or a specific program that you'd recommend to follow?
Besides the one that I don't have an app yet, but learning to take the horizontal breath is the first thing. And then doing exercises and stretches using that horizontal breath. Now, that might sound easy at first glance, but for instance, when I do a workshop that I call Breathing for Warriors, it's actually a really difficult workshop where you start to sweat and you're using breathing muscles and you're working them out. Because if you're really going to work out breathing muscles, you should do it apart from your sport. During your sport, you're using them, but you're not training them. You really need to sit and do breathing exercises so that you sweat and you work out your breathing muscles and nothing else. So for instance, one of the exercises that we do, it's a version of Kapalabhati. You're doing a candle blow, you're exhaling, but when you exhale, you really narrow your body, you really squeeze your abs and your intercostals and your obliques. And it does become a workout and you are sore the next day.
I can imagine that would be quite intense, the breath of fire.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So I know, Dr. Belisa, you've done a lot of sort of study around the scientific side of things. Have you got many studies or specific studies that you can refer to where athletes have performed better by doing these exercises?
There is a lot of literature, and there will be more literature in the next, I'd say, year or two. I have about 3 studies that are being finished right now, but there are a lot of classic studies, a lot of studies on breathing muscle strength. The person who really has done a lot of work on breathing muscle strength is a woman named Alison McConnell out of the UK. So she's done a lot on muscle strength. And then there is right now quite a bit of research on hypoxic training, which is interesting as well if you're going to be performing in a place that's high altitude. With endurance, I think we'd have to look sort of at the classic studies that looked at cycling and at swimming. Those really were, when you look at the history of breathing muscle science, we started with free diving and cycling and running. Those are a few sports. But now people really want to know, how is breathing muscle training going to help CrossFit? How is breathing muscle training going to help me as a power lifter or as an Olympic lifter? The questions are getting much more varied and much more specific to the sport. For instance, when I work with someone around breathing, it depends on their sport. So are they, say, a power lifter? Do they bench 700 pounds or would they like to? Or are they a golfer? When I'm working with someone who's in a precision sport, it's immensely important that they train their breathing muscles, but it's going to be very different than someone who's trying to lift hundreds of pounds, but just as effective and just as important.
So when you say it's very different, is there what you would get them to do very different?
Absolutely. So let's just take that example of the power lifter and the golfer. With the power lifter, you're going to want to take a very deep breath in, because when you brace, you want to be able to get a lot of intrathoracic pressure, not only to protect your spine, but to be able to be explosive. So if you're using your shoulders, you're not actually going to be taking a big deep breath. You have to relearn, what does a big deep breath feel like? And then you have to be able to brace correctly for that big deep breath all the way around your body and down around your pelvic floor. Now, for somebody who's in a precision sport like golf or shooting on a range or anything that has to do, or a career that has to do with tattooing, or a surgeon or someone who does Botox, an esthetician, is that you have to be able to extend the sweet spot in your exhale where your heart rate is very low. And that takes training as well. because you're going to shoot better, whether that's in golf and in billiards or at the range, at the very end of the exhale where your heartbeat is the slowest. So if you can actually get your heart rate to slow down, to have your breath support a very low heart rate, and to be able to recognize that exact moment, you're going to be able to perform better.
So when you work with these clients, do you use things to measure this?
Oh, absolutely. So I came up with the functional test called the BIC, the breathing IQ, because most of the time when you get breathing tests done, they're not functional. They don't actually translate into things you should do. You're not remeasured again to see if they've changed, and they don't really look at your breathing muscles. So for instance, as much as I love VO2 max, most people don't know what it's measuring and don't train to make it better. Spirometry that you get done in the hospital to see if you have, for instance, COPD or asthma may tell you what your lung volume is or what your lung velocity is, but it's not telling you. You never get exercises on here's how you can make this be better. Come back in a few weeks and let's make that number be optimal. So the breathing IQ, which I do, is a measurement, it's numbers, and it's something that you can change very quickly with practice, which is what I love, which is that if you were to get measured and you're a C, and I say, Allie, you're a C, if you're fine with that, then that's great. C is not terrible. You don't have to go to breathing summer school. You're not failing, but if you'd actually like to breathe better, you can do your exercises. I'll show you, which are all based around this lower body breath being as expansive as possible and as narrow as possible without shoulders. And let's measure you again in a week. Or here's how you can measure yourself. And what's interesting is that as your grade gets better, the stressors or the medical or emotional problems that you've come in with actually get better. So yes, there will be research showing that probably fall of next year, but it's what I've found and what most people, even anecdotally have been telling me happens to them. As their number gets better, as their grade, their breathing IQ gets better, their digestive problems get better, their back pain, their sleeplessness, and their anxiety.
So can we get your breathing IQ test online?
You can get it in the book. It's not actually by itself online. It goes with a lot of instructions, and it also goes with what you should do once you get that breathing grade. I don't think I'd want somebody to just have an F and then feel like they don't know what to do about the F.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, most of us will take it and find that we're really much less than optimal. It's something that goes together with the book, but you can pretty much figure right now, if you're breathing and someone looks at you or you're watching someone breathe and they're breathing up and down and there's not a lot of movement around the bottom part of their ribs, that's not going to be a good grade. If you need the specifics of the grade, then you should definitely get the book. But however, if you want to get a sense of yourself, your middle should expand and contract. And that doesn't necessarily mean a belly breath, because most of the time we try to sort of not have a belly. So taking a belly breath can be hard. But the belly breath I really teach just so that you can get used to the concept of your middle moving. Later on, the advanced breath is really just your middle expanding. You don't necessarily have to have a belly. Your sides can expand, and even your back is supposed to be able to expand because you actually do have a lot of lung real estate back there as well.
It sounds like there's obviously so many benefits ranging from sleep to, you mentioned several different things. What about from an athlete point of view, say the golfer or the weightlifter? I know you work with a lot of, semi-pros or pro athletes. What have you seen, from an anecdotal evidence point of view?
Well, one thing that happens is that your breathing grows or gets better naturally up to the age of 29. So for most people I work with, most athletes, and also sort of tactical combat athletes, if I look at firefighters, for instance, I just got back from working with firefighters in Canada, is that you want your career to be as long as possible, whether you're a competitive runner or you're a firefighter. Now, if your breathing starts to decline at age 29, what are you doing about keeping your breathing muscles strong so that you're able to compete late into middle and late adulthood, if you can, because you want to, especially when you're working with, for instance, firefighters, is that firefighters get more wise and more intuitive with experience, but also their breathing declines. So keeping them around longer, being able to have wise seasoned firefighters working is very important. And the same thing with athletes is that when you know how to breathe well, you can keep your breathing at age 29, even if you're not 29 anymore. You can keep your breathing to be like a younger athlete, and it really can be an edge over your competitor, not to mention the being able to recover from one day to the next, being able to recover well so that you don't get injured. And if you do get injured, having exercises you can do to keep your endurance and conditioning up and not get depressed.
And have you had athletes say, look, I actually got better results because of it? Like I won the...
All the time. And it's almost immediate. I know that I'm thinking of a runner particularly. She took one class, and again, it doesn't have to be with me, but she, spent some time working on her breathing and took a minute off her 5K the next time she went out and ran. And it's with every single person that something changes, something gets better almost immediately when they move their breath down to where it should be. And then if they continue to practice and practice hard and commit, their endurance skyrockets. So for instance, I did a class at a gym called Krav Maga Worldwide. It's not only martial arts, but it's CrossFit. And everybody in the class was asked, give me a baseline on your endurance. Give me someplace where you start to feel like you're gasping for air, or someplace where you hit a wall, someplace where you're actually starting to, push a little bit harder because things get more difficult. Do your breathing exercises and you will see that change. And without a doubt, I can tell you almost every single person in the class saw their endurance get better very, very quickly. So it's really kind of amazing because you own it. It's yours. It's nothing that you have to buy. It's nothing that, may not have. It's just working out your breathing muscles and making sure they're really strong, because your endurance depends on your cardio, but it also depends on your breathing muscles. And I can tell you most folks are not working out their breathing muscles. So it's untapped potential that's really sort of mind-blowing.
And it sounds like it can happen fairly quickly too, which is something that we all like, a quick fix.
Absolutely.
So, Dr. Belisa, I wanted to ask you, there's a lot of information out there today about breathing, and there's lots of different techniques that people are talking about, the Wim Hof being one of them. What's your sort of opinion, or how do you differ from, say, someone like Wim Hof?
Well, Wim Hof teaches a sort of a trance breathing, and he likes ice baths. So I don't do either of those things specifically. While I do like the cryo freeze and I have done ice baths, and I do see that they're tremendously helpful. And we actually have been doing them, historically for a very long time. Wim Hof has brought them back, which we can definitely appreciate. I think doing breathing in all sorts of settings safely, in extreme temperatures, again, safely, is very interesting. I think that when we're learning resilience, it's important to put ourselves into uncomfortable situations within reason that's going to help us, problem solve better, have better confidence, and just be stronger. As far as the trance sort of induced breathing, that's something that has been done for a long time. The people I like who teach it are folks, sort of classic folks like Stan Grof. He's sort of the father of holotropic breathing. There's really quite a few folks who have been teaching the trance breathing, since the 50s and 60s, who are really, really fascinating folks. I think there's space out there for people to teach all kinds of things related to breathing, and I am very inclusive and I reference people all the time. I know that one of my favorite teachers out there is somebody named Brian McKenzie. He does a lot of hypoxic training and breath holding. And I like where he comes from. He comes from a very scientific place, a very inclusive place, and, also very ethical place. So I really like what Brian does. But yeah, there's something out there for everyone. I know when I have people come to me and say, for instance, I'm doing teacher training right now. So they might call and say, I'd like to talk to you about what you teach. And I say, I'm happy to tell you what I do. And if it's not what you're looking for, if you're really looking for something that's maybe more spiritual or more having to do with traditional meditation, I will recommend you to someone else. I will tell you go take a class with Jeremy Youst or Jim Morningstar, David Elliott, or Dan Brule. If you're looking for something that's more practical and again about the biomechanics, although I do teach in meditation, that's more of what I do. But I think there's a place for everyone, and I encourage everyone to take all kinds of breathing classes. I know I continue to as well.
And what I love about what you're doing is that you've sort of got an option for everyone, or for people to take it to a different level. Like I could go out and buy the book Breathe and take myself through the 14 days, or I can go on and do a warrior workshop, which would be awesome. And I know also that you're doing the teacher training. And then also I'm looking forward to, I believe there's a masterclass in June in California.
Yes, there is.
If for those of you who are lucky enough to live close by, like me now, we can go to that. Dr. Belisa, is there anything else that you'd like to let our listeners know about in terms of the breath?
Let's see. You know what? It's so personal that really depends. I'm sure you have people listening who are saying, wait, she mentioned digestive problems. I have acid reflux. Is that going to help? And the answer is yes. And then you might have someone else who's saying, she mentioned anxiety. I have fear of public speaking. I wonder if it can help with that. And again, the answer is yes. Just because what I teach is so basic and so practical, but the reasons that you might be coming to the breath are so personal that all I can say is that you should look into it. It might sound a little woo-woo, but it's absolutely not. And that you might be surprised in that things that you thought had no remedy may feel better. I'll mention I was working with a particular powerlifter who, got to change his breathing and came back the next day and said, my brain fog is gone. For all these years, I just thought that this cloudy sense I had in my head was just something I had to live with. And all of a sudden, I can think clearly. Like I didn't realize how much in a fog I was. And I certainly couldn't predict that was going to happen. But everyone's experience is very, very personal and always very positive. So it's something that I'm really passionate about, and I hope you can tell.
Absolutely. And for me personally, I think asthma has been a big thing. Do you have many clients that have said that asthma has just been totally healed through breathing?
Yes, I have. And in fact, I'll have people come in. This happens, it's sort of disturbing because it happens more often than not where someone comes in with their inhaler and says, I was told I had asthma, 6 or 7 years ago, and we'll do the breathing. I'll actually take their spirometry and look to see their breathing tests. And they either don't have asthma anymore, but they've continued to get their prescription filled for their inhaler, or their asthma is not a problem with the elasticity in their alveoli or inflammation in their airway passages. Is really that their exhale muscles are weak. So if you can get your exhale muscles to be stronger, you can definitely either control or, maybe even get rid of your asthma if it really has to do, again, from the biomechanic point of view. So asthma is really, really fascinating. And again, there are other breathing methods that address asthma, such as Buteyko. If you combine what I teach with Buteyko, that could be very interesting as well. It's really a shame. Anyone who's being diagnosed with asthma should be given a breathing exercise protocol. And this really rarely ever happens.
Yeah, but the industry doesn't make quite as much money if they hand out a breathing exercise.
They don't make any money, which is why my work is fascinating, because people do get off their medications and they are empowered. And that's, exactly why I love doing what I do, is because you have everything you need to get yourself to feel better. I mean, I'm not saying that you should be off all your medications. There are some that are very important and you might need. However, breathing is something that's yours. And, we've forgotten that. We've forgotten how powerful it can be. We've forgotten how to do it right. So once I teach someone to breathe better, sometimes they come back because they'd like more exercises or they just like hanging out with me. But other times they figure out what they're doing wrong, they fix it, and they keep moving. And that to me is really true success when it comes to being a doctor and having patients.
And just one more thing, for those who have children and presumably under 5, they are breathing really well, what can we do to help those children continue breathing like that?
Make sure that you are modeling good breathing behavior. So I do have a book that's coming out fairly soon called The Belly Breath, which is very helpful when you're trying to teach a child about breathing. It's about a little boy and him breathing well and him teaching his parents how to breathe. But make sure as an adult that you are not telling them to take a deep breath and showing them a dysfunctional breath, because children learn by watching and by imitating. So that's definitely the number one thing you can do.
That's excellent advice. Thank you. And I'm wary of your time, but before I let you go, I have to ask you a question that we ask all our guests on the show. A bit random, but do you have a tattoo?
I do not. I don't have any tattoos. Although I will tell you that I always had the idea that I would have no tattoos at all. And then one day I would, actually get an enormous tattoo on my back, which I still may do.
Wow. So there's one coming soon.
I think there's one coming. Allie, do you have a tattoo?
You'll have to listen to the episode where I answer that question. Excellent.
I'd love to.
Thank you very much for coming on the show, and your insight around breathing has been amazing, and I'm sure that we've all learned a lot. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
For all the resources and show notes from today's episode, please go to www.ali.fitness. If you liked today's episode, please show your appreciation by going to iTunes, give us a 5-star review and subscribe.